Oklahoma Territory, 1890, on a flat stretch of prairie road between two towns that did not yet have proper names on any map worth trusting, where the grass ran unbroken to the horizon in every direction, and a man could go a whole day without seeing another living soul if he chose his road carefully. Jubal Greer had been choosing his roads carefully for the better part of 6 years. He was 38 years old, weathered brown by a decade of open country, and he drove a plain wagon pulled by 2 sound mules, carrying nothing in the bed behind him but the tools of a man who worked wherever work was offered, and stayed nowhere long enough for anyone to ask too many questions about where he had come from. He had ridden once with men whose names still turned up on wanted bills in territorial post offices, the Coltrane gang, out of the nations. 3 years of bank jobs and worse before Jubal Greer had woken up one morning in a lined shack with blood on his hands that was not his own, and had decided, without telling a soul, that he would rather die running from that life than keep living inside it. He had been running in his own quiet fashion ever since. Not from the law particularly, since the law had never gotten close enough to trouble him seriously. He was running from Barnabas Coltrane himself, who did not forgive men who walked away from his outfit, and who had let it be known, through the particular grapevine that carries word among outlaws and the men who track them, that Jubal Greer owed a debt that only blood would settle. He had crossed into Oklahoma Territory 3 days before, meaning to keep moving north toward the railroad and whatever work waited past it, when he found a woman standing alone at a crossroads a mile outside a scattering of buildings that called itself Prairie Junction, with a single carpet bag at her feet and no wagon of her own in sight. "I am headed to Millbrook," she said, before he had even brought the mules to a full stop. "It is 1 day's ride from here, and I would be obliged for the company of your wagon, if you are headed that direction, or near enough to it that a detour would not cost you too dearly." Jubal Greer looked at this woman, perhaps 28, plainly dressed in gray traveling clothes gone dusty at the hem, dark hair pinned back hard against the wind, a face that held itself very steady, the particular steadiness of a person who has learned not to ask for more than the bare minimum a stranger might grant her. "I am headed that direction," he said, which was not entirely true, since he had not been headed anywhere in particular until that moment, only away. Climb up. Her name was Vera Calloway, and she told him so plainly within the first mile, along with the fact that she was a widow. Her husband, a surveyor named Daniel Calloway, had been killed 8 months before in a fall from a railroad trestle he had been assigned to map, leaving her a small settlement from his employer and a decision to make about where to spend the rest of her life making a new one. "Millbrook has a schoolteacher's position open," she said. "I taught 4 years before I married. I wrote ahead and they have agreed to interview me, provided I can arrive before the end of the week." "You are traveling alone a long way for a job interview." "I am traveling alone because there is no one left to travel with me," Vera said, without any particular self-pity in the saying of it, the way a person states a fact of weather. "My husband is dead, my parents are dead, and my husband's family never much cared for me to begin with. I have found since Daniel passed that a woman either learns to ask strangers for rides to the next town, or she does not go anywhere at all, and I have decided I would rather go somewhere." Jubal Greer drove in silence a while after that, turning her answer over the way he turned most things over, slowly, from several angles, before committing to a response. "I know something about traveling alone," he said finally. 6 years of it, give or take. What takes a man 6 years across open country alone, if you do not mind my asking?" "I mind a little," Jubal said, But I will answer anyway, since you were honest with me about your own circumstances, and it seems poor manners not to return the favor. I rode with men I should not have ridden with, when I was young enough to think it was the only kind of freedom available to a man with nothing else offered him. I left that life 6 years back, and I have been putting distance between myself and it ever since, because the man who led that outfit does not care much for being left. Vera looked at him a long moment, weighing this the way she seemed to weigh most things, carefully and without visible alarm. You do not strike me as a dangerous man, Misty. Greer, I am not, any more. I intend to keep it that way, which is a good part of why I do not stay any place long enough to be found. They talked through the better part of that day, the wagon rolling steady across the flat grass country, and the talking took on the particular ease of two people who understood, without needing to say it aloud, that a single day's acquaintance carried a kind of freedom neither of them allowed themselves with people they expected to see again, the freedom to say true things plainly, since the conversation would end at sundown regardless. Vera told him about Daniel, not a great romance, she admitted, but a solid one, built on mutual respect and a shared appetite for hard work, and she grieved him honestly without pretending the grief was larger than it had actually been. Jubal told her, in pieces, about the outfit he had ridden with, about the morning in the line shack that had finally turned his stomach against the whole enterprise, about 6 years of moving through a country that had never once felt like it belonged to him, because he had never let himself belong to any one piece of it. By the middle of the afternoon, they had come to a fork in the road where a single old cottonwood stood alone against the sky. Its branches spread wide enough to throw shade over the whole crossing, and Jubal pulled the mules up there to rest them and let Vera stretch her legs. Millbrook is 8 more miles, he said, pointing down the left fork. We'll make it well before dark. Vera stood beneath the cottonwood a while, looking down both roads, and when she spoke again, her voice had lost some of the careful steadiness she had kept through the whole day's conversation. Daniel was a good man, she said, but he was restless the same way you are restless, Mr. Greer, and I spent 4 years of my marriage learning to expect that he would be gone more than he was home, mapping some new stretch of railroad in some territory I would not see for months at a time. I do not say that to speak ill of him. I say it because I have come to understand something about myself, standing here at this crossroads with everything I own in one bag, and I would rather say it plainly to a stranger I will likely never see again than carry it silent all the way to Millbrook. What is it you have come to understand? That I am tired, Vera said, of being the one left standing at crossroads, watching good men ride off toward whatever restlessness calls to them next, and telling myself I do not mind, because minding never once brought any of them back sooner. I did not ask you to stay, Mr. Greer. I only asked for a ride, and you were kind enough to give it, and I am grateful, truly. But I find myself wondering, watching you sit there with the reins in your hands, whether there is a man anywhere in this territory who has learned how to stay, rather than only how to leave well. Jubal Greer sat very still on the wagon seat, the cottonwood shade moving slow across both of them in the afternoon breeze, and something in him, something that had been running steady and unexamined for 6 years, came to a full stop for the first time since the morning in that line shack. I have never once, in 6 years, asked myself whether I wanted to stop running, he said slowly. I only ever asked myself whether it was safe to. I do not know that those are the same question, and I believe you have just shown me the difference between them without meaning to. He set the reins down across the seat between them. I am not going to pretend I have an answer to give you this minute, he said, but I am going to ask you a question of my own, plain as you asked yours. Do you need a man who stays, Mrs. Calloway? Not a man who gives you one good day's ride to the next town and rides on. A man who turns his wagon around at a crossroads like this one and does not leave again. Vera looked at him a long moment, the wind moving the cottonwood's leaves overhead, and she found, to her own surprise, that she was not frightened by the question, only quietly, carefully, hopeful in a way she had not let herself be in the 8 months since Daniel's fall. I do not know that I have the right to ask a stranger for that, on one day's acquaintance, she said. You did not ask it. I am the one asking it of myself. Jubal Greer looked down the right-hand fork of the road, the one that led away from Millbrook, away from any town, back toward the open running country he had spent 6 years learning to prefer to any roof or any promise. I believe I am done with that road, Mrs. Calloway. I believe I have been done with it longer than I let myself admit. And it took a woman at a crossroads telling me the truth plain to show me the difference between running from something and simply never choosing to arrive anywhere. He turned the mules toward Millbrook. I will see you to your interview, he said, same as I promised at the start of this day. And then, if you will permit it, I intend to find work in Millbrook myself and stay long enough to prove to you, slowly, that a man can learn to be found, the same as he once learned to be lost. Vera Calloway did not answer him with words. She simply sat back down on the wagon seat beside him, closer than she had sat the whole rest of that day, and let the silence between them carry the answer instead. By sundown, the wagon had reached Millbrook, and Jubal Greer had turned it around for good. Millbrook was a modest railroad town of perhaps 400 souls, built up around a depot and a grain elevator, and it welcomed Vera Calloway's interview for the schoolteacher's position with a warmth she had not expected. The town's council having grown weary of a rotating string of unmarried men who never lasted a full term before the winter isolation drove them back east. She had the position within the week. Jubal Greer found work at the livery, mucking stalls and shoeing horses at first, work that paid poorly but honestly, and within a month he had proven himself skilled enough with animals that the livery's owner, an aging man named Otto Reinhold with no sons to pass the business to, began speaking to him about a partnership. The two of them settled into a courtship that moved at the deliberate pace of two people who had each, in their own way, been burned by circumstance before. Sunday suppers, evening walks along the railroad tracks after Vera's students had gone home, the slow accumulation of small, trusted habits that neither of them named aloud, but both understood to be building toward something larger. Jubal fixed things around the small house Vera had rented near the schoolhouse, a sagging porch step, a chimney that smoked wrong, a garden gate that hung crooked, and he did it the way he had learned in 6 years of drifting to do most useful things, quietly, without being asked, and without expecting thanks for it. You do not have to keep fixing my house, Mr. Greer, Vera told him one evening, watching him plane down a warped door that had stuck through every rainy season since the house was built. I know, Jubal said. I do it anyway. It is the only language I have gotten skilled at speaking these 6 years. I never learned to court a woman with pretty words. I only learned to be useful, and to hope the usefulness said what I did not know how to say plainer. It says a great deal, Vera told him, and meant it. There was an evening in late summer when a boy in Vera's schoolroom, the son of a homesteading family struggling through a hard season, took sick with a fever that would not break, and Jubal Greer sat up 2 full nights with the family, riding 20 miles each way to fetch the nearest doctor, and then staying to help the exhausted parents manage the boy's care until the fever finally turned. He did not speak of it afterward. Vera learned of it only because the boy's mother came to the schoolhouse in tears of gratitude and Vera understood, watching this quiet, reticent man deflect every word of thanks offered him. That she had found, at last, the kind of staying she had described that afternoon beneath the cottonwood. It was in September, with the first cool edge of autumn coming into the prairie evenings, that Barnabas Coltrane found him. Coltrane arrived in Millbrook with 4 riders on a Saturday afternoon, dressed like cattlemen but carrying themselves like men accustomed to taking rather than earning, and he found Jubal Greer at the livery, shoeing a gelding for one of the town's ranchers, and he stood in the doorway a long moment before Jubal noticed him at all. 6 years, Coltrane said. I had begun to think you'd died somewhere convenient and saved me the trouble. Jubal set down the hoof he had been working and straightened slowly. I have no quarrel with you, Barnabas. I left because I would not have any more blood on my hands than the outfit had already put there. I have not spoken your name to a living soul in 6 years, and I do not intend to start now. That is not how it works, and you know it is not. Coltrane's voice carried, deliberately, to the other men at work in the livery yard. A man does not walk away from what we built together and get to live quiet in some grain town like nothing happened. I have come to collect what you owe, and I have come to make certain every man who might think about walking away after you understands exactly what walking away costs. Word of the confrontation reached Vera within the hour, carried by half the town, and she found Jubal at the livery that evening, his hands still shaking slightly with an anger and a fear he was working hard to master. They know about me now, he said. The whole town heard him say it plain. Otto Reinhold has not said a word to me since, and I would not blame him if he asked me to leave his livery for good. Otto Reinhold has known you 6 months as an honest, hard-working man, Vera said. One outlaw's accusation in a livery yard does not undo that in an afternoon, unless you let it. You should not be seen with me, Vera, not until this is settled. Coltrane does not fight fair, and he will not hesitate to use you against me if he judges it useful. I have already been left standing alone at one crossroads in my life, Mr. Greer, and I did not care for it. I do not intend to stand alone at this one either, simply because the road ahead has gotten dangerous. If you are staying to face this, I am staying beside you while you do it. Coltrane's gang camped outside Millbrook for the better part of a week, making their presence felt in small, deliberate ways, loitering near the schoolhouse when Vera's students were let out, drinking too loud and too long in the town's one saloon, letting it be known through careful word that Jubal Greer's debt would be settled before they moved on, one way or another. The town of Millbrook, to its credit, did not turn against Jubal the way Coltrane had clearly hoped it would. Otto Reinhold kept him on at the livery without a word of hesitation, and more than one rancher who had done honest business with Jubal Greer over the summer made a point of saying so publicly, and the sheriff, a capable if outmatched man named Deputy Frawley, Millbrook being too small a town for a full sheriff's office, began organizing what defense he could among the town's able-bodied men, understanding that Coltrane's outfit outnumbered and outgunned anything Millbrook could muster on its own. The trouble came to a head on the last Friday of September, when Coltrane, having run out of patience with the town's stubborn refusal to hand Jubal over quietly, decided to force the matter. He and his 4 riders came into Millbrook after dark, firing pistols into the air to scatter what resistance the town might muster, and they made straight for the livery, where they knew Jubal would be found working late, as he often did, to avoid the discomfort of walking Millbrook's main street under the whole town's watchful concern. Jubal was ready for them. Having spent the week since Coltrane's arrival preparing as best a livery hand with no gun of his own could prepare, and Deputy Frawley and 3 armed townsmen were positioned at the livery's edges before the riders ever reached it. The exchange of gunfire was brief and violent. Jubal took a bullet across his upper arm, deep enough to knock him down but not deep enough to keep him down, and he came up firing a shotgun Otto Reinhold had pressed into his hands 3 days before. And between Jubal's own fire and the townsmen's, 2 of Coltrane's 4 riders went down before the rest broke and ran for their horses. Barnabas Coltrane himself did not run. He came on foot into the livery yard, pistol raised, meaning to finish the business he had traveled 6 years to finish. And it was Vera Calloway, who had refused every entreaty to stay locked safe in her schoolhouse, and had instead armed herself with Daniel's old surveying rifle and taken up a position behind the livery's water trough, who put a bullet through Coltrane's shoulder before he could raise his own weapon to fire. He went down hard, the pistol skittering from his hand into the dust, and Deputy Frawley had him in irons before he could so much as reach for it again. "I told you," Vera said, coming to kneel beside Jubal where he sat bleeding against the livery wall, her hands already working to bind his wounded arm with strips torn from her own petticoat, "that I did not intend to stand alone at this crossroads either." "I noticed," Jubal said through gritted teeth, watching her work with the same steady competence she brought to everything she did. "I believe I owe you my life, Mrs. Calloway, on top of everything else I already owed you." "You owe me nothing," Vera said. "That is not how this works, Mr. Greer. I did not save you to collect a debt. I did it because I have decided, watching you these past months, that I would very much like you to keep on staying, and a man cannot stay anywhere if he is dead." Barnabas Coltrane was tried before the territorial court in November, and the surviving members of his outfit testified against him readily enough once it became clear their own sentences would go easier for the cooperation, and Coltrane himself was sent to the territorial prison for a term long enough that Jubal Greer, for the first time in 6 years, stopped watching the horizon for riders he did not want to see. Otto Reinhold made good on the partnership he had spoken of before the trouble ever started, and by the following spring, the sign above the livery read Reinhold and Greer, in letters Jubal had painted himself, slowly and carefully, the way he did most things worth doing. He and Vera were married that April, at the crossroads beneath the old cottonwood where he had first turned his wagon around, the whole town of Millbrook making the 8-mile journey out to witness it, because a story like theirs, once it had gotten around a small town the size of Millbrook, was not the kind of story anybody wanted to miss the ending of. They built a bench beneath that cottonwood the following summer, a simple thing of good cedar, and it became a habit of theirs, on quiet Sunday evenings, to drive out and sit beneath the tree a while, watching the 2 roads run off in their separate directions across the grass, one of them leading back toward the open running country Jubal Greer had once called the whole of his life, and the other leading toward the small steady life he had chosen instead, the day a widow asked him for nothing more than a single day's ride and gave him, without meaning to, an entire different road to travel for the rest of his life. Some conversations last an hour and change nothing at all. Others last the length of a single wagon ride and reroute an entire life. Quietly, at a crossroads under an old cottonwood, with nothing more dramatic exchanged than an honest question and an honest answer. She only asked for a ride. She never asked him to stay. But he did anyway, and by sundown of that very first day, he had turned his wagon around for good, and he never once looked back toward the road he had left behind. If your heart has ever leaned toward a story where love arrived quiet and took the long road and stayed long enough to change everything, then this story was for you. Out on the open grass country of Oklahoma Territory, where a lone cottonwood still stands watch over a crossroads not found on any official map. The love between Jubal Greer and Vera Calloway became the kind that needed only a single day and an honest question to change the whole shape of two lives at once. If stories of frontier love that endured through hardship, prejudice, and the kind of silence only the West knows speak to you, follow the lonesome trail for more. Here, the love stories are quiet, the courage is real, and the last word is always worth the wait. Until the next trail,